Hey y'all, Tyborg here. I previously made a video about move-in damage in Thrill of the Fight 2, and I had promised that's the start of a series of videos about the mechanics of Thrill of the Fight 2. So this is going to be part 2 in that series. Today what we're going to talk about are two slightly interconnected, similar systems that are having a huge impact on how people are getting knocked down, the type of experience people are getting in Thrill of the Fight 2. The first is the stance system, which they added in the most recent update. And the second is anti-spam, which has been around for 2 updates now. So I'm going to talk about both of those, sort of how they work, how they're affecting you in game, what you need to be aware of as you're playing to not get punished by these systems, so to speak. So first off is the stance system. So this is something brand new. It was never in the game until this most recent update, V5 as people are calling it, that dropped a few weeks ago. So the stance system is whenever you are playing, throughout the whole game, you are now in one of 2 stances. You are either in defensive stance or aggressive stance, I think they call them. The point is, one is, hey, I'm not attacking. The other one is, I am attacking. The whole idea here is when you're in defensive stance, which means you are not punching for some period of time. They've been a bit cryptic as to what triggers the stances, but seemingly if you're not punching, you go into defensive stance. You are much more resilient to being knocked down. The exact numbers here, once again, they haven't given us, but the threshold is much higher. You're much less likely to get knocked down from a single stray punch. You are much less likely to get stunned, it seems, from a single punch. So if you're just hands up, even if everything's getting through and they're just punching your nose and you've got your hands out here and you bring it in and they start punching the sides, if you're never punching back, you are very protected. Not entirely, but very protected. People have done some testing. They found it very, very, very difficult to knock someone down who is just shelling up like that. So that's defensive stance. Once you start punching, no idea exactly how quickly it triggers, but once you start punching, I think it's pretty fast, like maybe 1 punch or 2 punches, you flip. It's binary. You go straight from defensive stance into aggressive stance. And once you're in aggressive stance, you are much, much more susceptible to being knocked down, to being stunned. So as soon as you start throwing those punches, now if you get caught from the same punch, the exact same punch that you could have just eaten before, like it was your brunch, now you're getting dropped, or now you're getting stunned, and then your opponent's going to follow up and start swinging at you. So the stance system is really, really important to keep in mind. I think that it has led to a pretty problematic meta in the game that is narrowing the number of styles that can be effective in the game. So, for example, volume fighters who are not necessarily spamming, and we'll talk about the anti-spam in a minute, but just people who like to throw punches in bunches and be aggressive and come at you, they are pretty heavily nerfed because all you have to do is hands up and just eat punch, punch, punch until you see that opening and then land one big counter and they're going to get stunned or dropped. And just as long as you're never, ever punching until you're ready to throw that one counter punch. It's pretty silly, I think, but that is how you can handle that. You just be very defensive, you be very patient, you don't throw until you are ready to throw that counter and land. So that's really all there is there. You want to be careful not to always be in aggressive stance. I think the worst style that you can be right now with the way the game is in between, where you're not super aggressive and you're not just pure counter punching, but you're just throwing a combination move or a combination move, because you're always in aggressive stance because you never stop punching long enough to flip back to defensive, but you're not really sort of overwhelming your opponent with pressure and making them feel that and keep them in defensive stance. So it kind of feels like you need to either be that super defensive, turtling one counterpunch, which seems to be the most effective, or actually be kind of spammy. I don't know. That's kind of been my experience so far. So that's stances. What is anti-spam and how does it play into all of this? So anti-spam is something that was added in the V4 update back in April. I think they released it and has stuck around. It's still in the game. Basically, if you are throwing non-stop for over some period of time, some number of punches, we don't know exactly how much, then you start to build up vulnerability, meaning it becomes easier to knock you down if they land a single shot, and your punches, the damage starts to taper off. So I can go, okay, I'm starting to, anti-spam's kicking in. Okay, now these punches are doing less and less, and then I get hit with a very light shot and I get dropped. So that's anti-spam. That's what it does. I personally think that it's probably overtuned in the sense that there are some fighters that I think are real volume fighters and are actually putting weight behind their punches that are getting triggered by this. But the idea is to stop. We've all played spammers in this game, as in people who just have no defense and they just try to overwhelm you with non-stop, just flicking out silly punches. And so it's supposed to stop that, but obviously there's going to be some collateral damage. So the anti-spam, you need to be aware of that too. It kind of plays into the same thing as the stances. If you're just throwing, you're going to be in aggressive stance and have the anti-spam, and you're going to get knocked down by a stiff breeze. Someone's going to throw the lightest punch you've ever seen. It's going to knock you down, and you're going to go wide. And it's because of these two mechanics. That's what's causing you to get knocked down. So that's the thing to understand. Your chin in the game is going to be impacted by these mechanics. Whether you think that's realistic or not, or a good mechanic or not, you just have to play around it until the devs update it or don't. The thing to know about anti-spam is that they also, in the latest patch, added something called adrenaline rush or adrenaline boost, something like that. Which, what it said that does in the patch notes is when you stun your opponent, you give them that flash and you see that droopy face and you want to rush in for the kill, anti-spam no longer gives damage reduction to you. So if you just start wailing on them non-stop to try to get the knockdown, all of those are going to do full damage. But what I did not realize originally, because I didn't read the patch notes carefully, I don't believe that reduces the vulnerability added from anti-spam. So I have been knocked down a couple of times rushing in for the kill after getting a stun where I just start wailing, thinking, oh, you know, I've got that adrenaline boost protection, and then I get one tap and I get dropped. And that's because I was wrong. The anti-spam is still making me more vulnerable, but it is not nerfing my punches. So keep that in mind. Try to stay cognizant when you are rushing in for the kill, which you still should do because your opponents are so vulnerable when they're stunned. But when you're rushing in for the kill, be at least a little careful. Try to take little pauses, you know, combos of 3 or 4, boom, 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 and then boom, 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 you know, and just kind of keep moving around and don't just throw caution to the wind completely. So that's really all I've got for these two mechanics. Just be aware of them, keep them in mind, try not to get caught by them and knocked down. Go kick some virtual butt. Y'all have a good one.